with you a few things. That was wonderful, Jane. You were too kind. I endocrine system, but as Jane knows, and others who have heard some of the talks before that I've had, I'm really what my goal is to really focus on the terminology and the science so that you have the foundation. I have to caution you, I am not a physician trained in endocrinology. So I'm really not going to spend as much time in some of the more fun things. I know for some of you, in terms of like talking about details of the symptoms and what you expect in the doctor's office, and really into treatment as much as I will on just having you understand the basics of endocrinology. So I hope you're still with me, and I hope you're still okay with that. Jane knows how I approach things, and I'm going to approach it the same way that I usually do. So with that explanation, it is lovely to be with you all today, and I am going to give you an overview of what's called the endocrine system, or hormones, really, but it's more than just hormones, you'll see. And my little tagline for today, it's not me, it's my hormones. And you'll see, and Jane alluded to this, your hormones do a lot of things behind the scenes. It's still you. You may not be able to blame your hormones 100%, but yes, you can. Much of your behavior and things that happen to you are guided by your hormones. So that's very true. All right, let me see if I can, and this is a new system. Why is it? There we go. So because I haven't spoken to a lot of you, yes, Jane mentioned, I have worked at a number of different organizations in the United States, in Vietnam, and in Singapore. And I've even done a little bit of consulting work in Malaysia as well. But I'm back in the United States, and I have both research science background and medical education background. And education is actually my passion now. And hence this activity we're doing together. Let me minimize this thing here. Okay, so today, let me start like I always do. Why do we care about this topic? Well, we care about this topic specifically with endocrinology because of all the things that Jane mentioned and more that you'll see. But also, again, I really want to stress, I'm using terminology that you're going to hear when you go to the doctor's office, or when you turn on the news, or when you read something. And so this topic and others really does help you sort of expose you to the terminology, the words that are used and help you sound informed when you're talking about these things. So don't worry about the content and memorizing everything, but get familiar with the type of terms that we use so that when you talk to people and when you're talking about Calorie Life products or other people that you'll sound a little bit more informed. So, this is part of the modern medical and health sciences. So hopefully, point number 2 is that this will help protect you from misinformation. You're going to see a lot of misinformation out there. And my goal is to try to help you at least understand what's real, and perhaps so therefore you can understand what's not real, or what's exaggerated, or what people are trying to do to maybe sell you something without telling you the truth about something. That's number 2. Number 3, knowing about the endocrine system and its function could help you with your own health as you go through endocrine problems, perhaps, or a loved one does. So at least you'll be able to speak to the doctor, I hope, with some amount of knowledge, and again, understand what's probably happening and maybe what's not happening. And then finally, understanding of the human endocrine system is really complicated. I'm not expecting you, and I'm not even an expert in this. You are not going to be an expert in the human endocrine system by the end of this time, but it's just good for you to understand how, the basics of it, and that's what today is for. So yes, Jane, here you go. You were asking about and mentioning the topics we've had so far. So those of you joining from Calorie Life Malaysia may not know this, but those of you joining with Jane's group knows that I have talked about the human stress response. I have covered cancer immunology, cancer itself, the peripheral and the central nervous system. We've looked at human eye disease, human GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. We've looked at respiratory health and diabetes. And then now we're doing endocrinology or hormones. So we've covered a nice number of systems, body systems. So what will we cover today? We're going to be starting out with an introduction, like I always like to do. We are going to talk a little bit about biology, so that if you want to take a nap, that's the time to do so, but I hope you don't. And then we're going to talk about treatment and things related to that, including the incidence of endocrine disorders, meaning how prevalent, how many people have it all over the world, what's the impact of the. So as usual, I'm going to start with a very basic overall definition, and I like to also bring up some interesting facts. So let's get started. So let's define the human endocrine system. It is a complex network of glands, so secreting organs, if you will, and the organs that have those glands in the body that produce and or secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream. So again, it's complex. You're going to see an anatomy in a minute, but glands and organs that produce and secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream. That's what the human endocrine system is. It acts as the body's chemical messenger system. So those hormones are, in essence, chemical messengers doing things to your body. They don't just secrete for any reason. They target the organs and tissues. The endocrine system are glands and organs. They're producing things, and they're having effects on other tissues in other locations. Maybe you'll see in a minute, the brain is producing things that maybe affect your heart or your kidneys. Okay, sometimes very, very far away from where that initial secretion came from. So again, target organs and tissues. The targets of those are all over the body and sometimes very far away. Hormones travel to all parts of your body, and they only activate the cells in that tissue, the target tissue. Let's say it's your heart that's being told to beat faster. Well, the hormones will only cells inside the heart if the cells have receptors that match those hormones. So hormones do not affect everything all over your body. They only affect the cells that are going to have the receptors. In other words, the matching receptor for that hormone. So not all cells are affected. And so that's why you can have something in one part of your body secrete something, generate it, produce it, secrete it into the blood, and then maybe something very far away can respond to it because the cells that are doing the responding can be turned on by those hormones. That's a very essential component of endocrinology. So even though hormone signals are slow to reach their target, so this process is fairly slow. Hormones don't act in seconds. They can, some, but not typically. They affect your body system for a very long time. So this is very different than your nervous system. Your nervous system is the opposite. The nervous system is instant, like faster than you can even know. And the effect is very short-lived. Here, this is the opposite. This hormone signals are slow, but they affect you. They can affect you for a long time, sometimes years. Just want to tell you, if you see a doctor and they specialize in this, they are known as endocrinologists. That's the term, endocrine system, endocrinologist. They're the ones that often you will see, if they're specialists, that will look at things like growth in children who are growing slowly, things like menopause, although that's sometimes done with a obstetrics gynecology doctor, but an endocrine doctor will work if you have lots of issues with your diabetes often, and other kinds of things. So the thing is, endocrine system overlaps with many other systems. So sometimes your family doctor will be dealing with your endocrine problems, but if it's very specialized, you'll go see an endocrinologist. That's just terminology for you. Now let's talk about some interesting facts. Hormones regulate your mood, as Jane said, and your awake sleep cycles. Those are two very unique things. There does a lot more than that. And then hormone imbalances. So imbalances of your hormone system. What I mean by imbalance, when there's a that can have profound effects on your health. We know that very much now. We don't always understand exactly how, but we know that it can affect your health quite miserably, quite terribly in some cases. Hormones are found in the foods we eat and in the environment. So, by the way, plants, if you think, oh, plants are always healthy for you, they're fine. You don't worry. There's no chemical. No, that's not true. Plants some plants can make hormones that mimic or look very similar to our own hormones. So that doesn't mean they're dangerous, but that means that we do need to be careful sometimes about eating too much of one particular plant, especially if it has a mimic, a very similar type of hormone that we normally make, because you're actually taking more of that hormone when you eat that plant. That's just one of the interesting facts of the endocrine system. Okay, I'm going to take a look at Jane to see if she gives me a thumbs up. Are we doing okay? Everyone hearing me and we're doing fine? Great. So far, so good, everybody. I hope. I want everybody to be awake. There's going to be a test later. I'm kidding, no test. All right, let's now continue to define the human endocrine system a little bit more. So we introduced the word hormones. We're going to really go into details in a minute. What are the role of hormones? Hormones act, again, as chemical messengers, and they regulate things like your metabolism, meaning burning fat, burning sugars, etc. Your growth, so how tall you are, that's very much impacted by hormones, especially during your childhood. Reproduction, pregnancy is all about hormones and hormone regulation. And male testes and sperm production, very much influenced by hormones. Mood, whether you're happy and sad. We don't understand all of it, but it has a behavioral health component. So yes, absolutely, hormones regulate how you feel. And sleep cycles. These are just some examples. They all regulate things like your calcium levels and the amount of fat you store and all sorts of things. They're really involved in so many aspects of your biology and therefore your human health. One of the things they do very much so that's still being understood today is they maintain something called homeostasis, your normal balance of things like your pH balance in your blood and other types of homeostasis, how much sugar you have, how much energy you have. Your body operates in a very narrow window, like a very not too high and not too low for most things. And the hormones help balance that. Make sure you're not overreacting or underreacting. And hormones are essential for maintaining the body's internal balance, and imbalances are what cause health issues. So when you disrupt homeostasis, you disrupt your health. I had mentioned this earlier, but in the main definition, the endocrine system is made up of network of glands, specialized glands that secrete hormones directly into the blood, and we're going to look at those. And again, the endocrine system operates slower than the nervous system, but produces a longer lasting effect. Okay, so I've repeated myself a little bit because that is the definition. Now let's look at the glands and organs of the endocrine system. I'm going to show you some words first and then a picture next. So you have primary endocrine glands. These are the ones that make the vast majority of your hormones. And then you have some secondary, I'll show you. The first primary ones are your pituitary glands. You might have heard the word pituitary or thyroid or parathyroid, or the adrenal glands, and something known as the pineal gland. You might not have heard that. But the adrenal, parathyroid, thyroid, and pituitary are very, very important. They're the ones that make the bulk, the most of the hormones. They're not the only ones. And they regulate things like metabolism, as Jane said earlier, stress, calcium, like the availability of calcium for your bones, and your sleep patterns. Some of them are located in your brain. You'll see them in a minute where all of them are. Another one, which is not a primary, but a secondary and very important gland and organ, is your pancreas. The pancreas controls your blood sugar. That's what is damaged or has problems in diabetes. So the pancreas manages the blood sugar. Reproductive hormones, so your ovaries and are in women and testes or testicles in men, those are also, even though they're reproductive, they're also part of the endocrine system, secondary endocrine organs, and they produce sex hormones essential for reproduction and sex characteristics. They're responsible for breast development, hair development, all sorts of things. The distinction between a man and female from the outside looking in is really regulated by hormones. Characteristics, of course. And then additional hormone producing organs, things like the hypothalamus, kidneys can produce hormones, liver can produce hormones, heart, placenta releases hormones influencing things like blood pressure, metabolism, and the placenta, very important, it produces hormones during fetal development. So while your baby, which is not a baby yet, is developing. So lots and lots and lots of things the hormones do. They do just about everything in the body to some extent. Now, where are these? So if you look at the picture, you can see the hypothalamus is way up here on top. That is the central regulator. That is the mastermind, like the central computer. And then you have the pituitary gland right below it. The pineal gland is over to the side. We don't talk about it much, but it is important. Those three are the primary endocrine organs. All the rest of these are secondary. So we've talked about them already, but just very quickly, the hypothalamus over here is the central coordinator that links the endocrine system to the nervous system. It's a very important link coordinator. The pituitary glands over here release hormones from the hypothalamus and make its own. The thyroid gland, something you might have heard about. Some people have an autoimmune disorder against their thyroid. Some people have very inflamed thyroids here in the neck region, and they regulate metabolism, human development, maturation, and they regulate weight and energy. That's why a lot of people who have weight issues, maybe they're overweight or severely underweight, often they'll look at the doctors will look at the thyroid gland and maybe prescribe some medications that help the thyroid regulate things properly. The adrenal gland, which is up, where's the adrenal gland? I don't see it right now. Where is it? I guess it's not in this picture. Okay. There it is. Oh, sorry. The adrenal gland down here. Yeah, I don't know why I was looking way up there. Yes, there we go. Not the ovary. It's up above the spleen. It's the there's two parts to it. It's the regulate stress, blood pressure, glucose metabolism, and water and salt balance. A lot of things. Again, I don't want you to memorize all of these. Here we go again. Here's another picture of some of these. So quite a few different ones. The testes all the way down at the bottom. You've got your ovaries, pancreas, adrenal glands. You've got some thymus glands here and thyroid. And then these are the central ones. Pancreas, again, glucagon and insulin producers. They regulate your blood glucose and play a large role in diabetes when there's problems with it. Ovary and placenta located on both sides of the uterus over here, boom, boom, and they produce estrogen and progesterone. These are what we think of as female hormones, right? Regulate menstrual cycle and pregnancy. And then testes, found in men in their male scrotum, produce testosterone, that's the male hormone, and they produce, of course, sperm, the testes do. And these things don't just regulate sperm production. Testosterone and other hormones protect muscle, bone health, development of male characteristics, and of course, male reproduction. All right, so there we go. That is all of the human endocrine system, the definition, the location, and what it's about. But really, as Jane said, and as you might know, when we talk about the endocrine system, we're actually talking about hormones. Hormones are the essential component. So let's look at some hormones. There is a lot of them, and there's no way you need to memorize any of these. However, some of them are so common to you, you'll already know. Some you've never heard of, I'm sure, and that's okay. Hormones, again, act as chemical messengers released in the blood and act somewhere else. Although hormones reach all parts of the body, as I said before, only the target cells with the compatible or the appropriate receptors for those hormones can respond. So they blood sugar, differentiation, growth, function of reproductive organs, body growth, energy production, and all sorts of things. So that there are 4 classes of hormones. Again, nothing for you to memorize, but just to know this is the science, basic science. There are amino acid is one large class. You might have heard of epinephrine. That's in the epi tube for people who have severe allergies. They can inject themselves with an epi tube. I don't know if you ever heard of that. That's derived from an amino acid hormone. And then they also have, there's thyroxine, which is produced by your thyroid. That's an amino acid one, an example. There are more. Eicosanoids, the prostaglandins and leukotrienes. You might have heard of those and you might not have. I know them because they're very well studied in the immune response and in inflammation and allergy response. Peptides and growth, those you might have heard about because growth hormone is one of those. Oxytocin is another one. Insulin is another one. Those are part of the peptide class. And then finally, steroids. This one I'm sure you have heard about. People who build muscles take them, sometimes illegally. They're not good for you. I would avoid taking them if I were you, unless they're given by a doctor. Things like cortisol, estrogen, and testosterone. So believe it or not, estrogen is under the steroid class. Estrogen itself is not a steroid, it's a hormone, but it's part of the class of hormones that's known as the steroid class. All right. There are over 50 distinct human hormones. There's a lot of them. And here is just some of them. I do not want you to memorize this list, but I want you to quickly look to see if you've ever heard of these. You've got things like adrenaline. You probably heard of that one. That's the one that goes way up in your heart rate when people scare you or something like that. Or when you're... That's an interesting effect. That phone with adrenaline that just went through that. See, that was a great example. But adrenaline pumps up your heart rate. Melatonin, you might have heard of. Some people take that to help them sleep. So that is involved naturally in your sleep-wake cycles. Noradrenaline, thyroxine, dopamine. That's another one many of you might have heard about if you've heard about the brain and the reward pathway. Prostaglandins, as I mentioned just now, the immune system, prostacyclines, glucagon and insulin. Those are the 2 that are involved in the diet, but energy metabolism utilization, proper utilization of glucose, of sugar. Amylin, adiponectin, ACTH, antidiuretic, calcitonin. Very important as we age and when people their bones become brittle, they often are not regulating the production of calcitonin very well. And that's calcium and bone maturation. FSH, a male hormone. Gastrin, stomach digestion. As I mentioned earlier, there's progesterone. There are so many. Okay. Ooh, sorry. Note, there are many more that you might have heard of or even not have heard of. So that's just that. All right. Now, here's the interesting part. Where can you find hormones? Hormones are found in food: beef, pork, dairy, and chicken. Often added, but sometimes natural. Where does milk come from? Milk comes from cows that are lactating. Therefore, guess what? They're preparing to have a baby. So what happens? The milk is going to have lots of hormones. That's normal. So that's a normal cow-produced hormones. But as you might know, hormones are added to beef, pork, and dairy to the chicken or the pig or the cow to make them grow more, make more muscle, and therefore have a higher yield. So those are added to food. And so when you eat food, you get them. Just to let you know, at least the FDA in the United States, and I'm sure I know in Europe, and I'm sure Malaysia has its own regulations, but they have really cut down on that a lot. Because they've noticed it's been too much. So a lot of times you can buy food now, or sometimes the government is mandated to cut down, but you can buy foods that are hormone free. They're moving in that direction. Hormones are found in plants. Soybeans have natural hormones called flavones. Flaxseed and grains something called lignans, and even sprouts have something called phytoestrogens. These are natural. They're not bad for you, but they can, in large amounts, of course, they can mimic your hormone in large amounts. They can be less healthy. So you just have to, for the most part, you're fine. They'll be okay. But in certain people with certain hormone conditions, they just might need to be careful. All right. Hormones are found in the environment. That's the big one that we are really focusing on now in terms of environmental cleanups and things. And these are called endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs. So when I say hormones are found in the environment, sometimes it's not the actual hormone. It's a chemical in the environment that can trigger your hormonal response system or block it or disrupt it. So it can be problems for your hormones. So what are examples? There's three of them: wastewater, human waste, and industrial chemical or pesticides that are made. So the ones in wastewater are from agricultural runoff, meaning the synthetic hormones added to animal foodstuffs, as I talked about before. And then as the animals poop or die or whatever, some of that, the water that gets contaminated with the hormones from there. Human waste. People take steroids. Sometimes they're given it by a doctor. Other times they're taking it on their own. Growth hormones, not usually the natural ones. This is usually supplemental. And then they excrete them in their urine or in their poo, and that can get into the ground and contaminate that, and can be found in various places. So when the water is cleaned in the sewage system and whatever, it's not all, these things are really tiny and they're hard to remove, okay? And then finally, industrial chemicals and pesticides, a big one. Synthetic chemicals that act as these endocrine disrupting chemicals, such as BPAs found in plastics, pesticides like DDT, which they used to spray in Vietnam or used in agriculture, and personal care products that contain things like phthalates, parabens, and others. These are chemical effect on your hormonal system. Many companies now stop producing these inside there. When I say personal care products, I'm talking about facial products, things that make you look beautiful, but your skin products, UV protecting products, all sorts of things. Okay, so they're found a lot, and the community as a whole, all of the world, has been starting to regulate this because it was like way too much from all sorts of activity. All right, let's move on. I'll do a Jane check. Are we doing okay? Is everybody still asleep? I mean, awake? That's what I really meant to say. Is everybody still awake? Good. A few faces here. Most people have turned off. They're like, I'm not being caught sleeping. No, that's fine. All right, let's move on. The common diseases of the endocrine system. Here's the stuff you might really be interested. Diabetes mellitus. So there are diabetes itself. There are over 500 million people globally, who have diabetes caused by insulin deficiency and resistance, or resistance, I shouldn't say and. So, sorry, I was just checking all the hearts and claps. That's nice, thank you. Thyroid disorders impact. So thyroid diseases like hyperthyroidism, and either it's your thyroid gland is either making too much or too little. Those are very common diseases seen by endocrinologists, and they cause metabolic imbalances worldwide. Adrenal and pituitary conditions, two of the other glands I was talking about. There's something called Addison's, Cushing's, and pituitary disorders that really affect things like hormone regulation. They cause fatigue and growth issue problems. And then you have PCOS and men's syndrome. PCOS, these are both female dysregulations, and PCOS causes infertility, um, and it's due to the fact there's too much androgen in women who have PCOS. And then menopause and men syndromes are caused by, no, sorry, that's not menopause. And I apologize about that. I forgot to check what men stands for, but it is there is menopause that's not on this list. Menopause is not a disorder. It is a natural thing that happens, but it seems to be getting maybe more troublesome as more hormones are around, and it needs to be mediated in many people, but it's not it's a part of the normal aging process in women. Men, we don't tend to get menopause, but maybe there's some evidence that we might a little bit. But in women, there's menopause. That's different than men's syndromes. Again, menopause is not a disease. How about that? That's the best way to say it. PCOS is a disease, and polycystic ovary syndrome, I think it's called. Yeah. All right, next. Why is it not clicking? Hello, give me a second. Okay. What are some common symptoms? So when you have endocrine disorders, you often have, this big one is fatigue, feeling tired all the time, weight changes, mood swings, trouble having a baby or other reproductive issues. And it varies by affected gland. So it can be very from one person to the other. But fatigue, weight changes, mood swings tend to be very, very common. Diagnostic challenges. So doctors often have a hard time identifying endocrine problems because the symptoms are often mimicked in other conditions. So fatigue and weight changes can be very common in cancer conditions, and other diseases. And then mood swings can be common in behavioral mood disorders that are not necessarily hormonal endocrine problems. So because they overlap with many other conditions, the accurate diagnosis of endocrine disorders is very complex and often takes a specialist. And then methods to diagnose. Usually blood and urine can be taken, or imaging studies to look at the size of your, let's say, thyroid gland, for example. And those are used to identify hormonal and gland problems. This is a hard one for people because they often don't know, but if you are tired often, if your weight changes, if you know you have mood swings that are just not right, like you break down crying at the slightest thing, for example, or you're overly happy when you shouldn't be, or you have trouble with reproductive issues, then you want to look as much as possible, as early as possible, to detect these symptoms so that you can have timely treatment and improve outcomes. Okay, how are we doing on time? Good, we're still okay. So let's move up to our last bit, current treatments for endocrine disorders. So the biggest one that you might have heard about is hormone replacement therapy. Basically, whatever you're either not producing enough of or producing too much of, usually it's not producing enough, you're going to get that, you can get that hormone from the doctor can prescribe you with that. So that's used to treat things like hypothyroidism, growth, when you don't grow well enough, and that's usually done in childhood. And diabetes, for example, to insulin is an example of hormone replacement therapy, when you inject insulin, for example. What about surgery and radiation? Less common, but definitely helps, especially if you have a tumor or a gland abnormality, such as removing the thyroid. That's called thyroidectomy. And if you have thyroid cancer, for example, you would use surgery or radiation often. Lifestyle modifications. I say this in every talk we have, right, Jane? Lifestyle. Diet, physical activity, stress management can help manage endocrine conditions, especially such as things like PCOS, the polycystic ovary syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and other ones. Often it's simply they can't do too much. Maybe you don't want to get hormones because they have their own side effects, but altering your diet and getting more physical activity, stop like that can help. And then ongoing monitoring and education. Just educate yourself. Keep going to see the doctor, especially when you have symptoms, at least once a year, and make sure you're healthy and happy. These are the types of hormone replacement therapy. You can have implants, patches, pills, creams. There are vaginal rings and suppositories and creams. I don't know a lot about this, but there are ways to get hormones into your body. And then we'll skip the other ones because I'm about to talk about alternative medicine next. But the hormone replacement therapy is a big business. Let's talk about the incidence and wrap up. So there are endocrine disorders are divided into several sections. The blue is 36% of all endocrine disorders in the world are metabolic, things like insulin and sugar and weight and have you. But specifically, percent just by itself. 12% bone metabolism is another area. You have thyroid disruption, that brown. The yellow is sexual and gonadal area, so reproductive. And then 10% is just general endocrinology. So that just gives you an idea of the breakup. Most of them are metabolic or diabetes, the blue and the red. And then 80 million people suffer from endocrine disorders. That's just a rough estimate all over the world at any one time, and about 1,000 out of 100,000 people. So, 10% of everybody is walking around this world with at least some endocrine disorder. The one that's most common is PCOS. For women, have about 5 to 25% of women. The reason it's a range is it depends on where you are in the world. Diabetes, 422 million plus people, men, women, and children have some form of diabetes, type 1, diabetes type 2, controlled, uncontrolled. And then other things are things like obesity disorders and osteoporosis, which is a slow breakdown of your bones, if you will. Finally, complementary approaches include acupuncture, herbal supplements like ashwagandha and black cohosh, which I don't know what these things are. Jane may tell you about some other things in a minute. Mind-body practices like yoga and meditation to reduce stress, yes, and reduce support conditions like adrenal fatigue and PCOS have shown to work. And then holistic integrative care, so combining conventional medicine with complementary therapies such as yoga and your medication. So there's a lot of things that you can do. I'm not an expert in these areas. I hope that you have now a slightly better understanding of the endocrine system, how complex it is, what it's made up of, hormones and glands, and you understand a little bit more about what hormones do, and that you understand that the endocrine system plays a role in reproduction, growth, development, homeostasis, and that you know that things like diabetes, menopause, pregnancies, Cushing's are all examples of diseases, and that you know that hormone replacement surgery, lifestyle modifications can all be used from a standard clinical treatment perspective. And that is all for today. Let's stop the share. It is now back to Jane. All.